A mother elephant in Kenya is walking across the savannah with two companions. All three have poison-tipped arrows lodged in their sides, courtesy of poachers who decided shooting elephants was a reasonable line of work. The elephants are bleeding, in serious pain, and have every conceivable reason to avoid anything resembling a human for the rest of their lives. Instead, they walk directly toward a wildlife rescue center, not away from it, toward it. One of these elephants had previously mated with two former orphans raised and released by that exact facility, meaning she somehow connected that specific stretch of savanna and the species responsible for shooting her with the concept of help rather than harm. This actually happened. It's documented, photographed, and published by the rescue organization itself, and it's one of the stranger, more unsettling facts about the animal kingdom once you really sit with it. Wild animals. Creatures with every biological and evolutionary reason to view humans as the most dangerous predator on the planet, which we've established statistically and measurably is true, sometimes walk straight toward us when they're in crisis. Not toward another member of their own species, which would at least make some intuitive sense, toward us specifically. The species most responsible for hunting them, displacing them, poisoning them, and generally complicating their existence for thousands of years. So why does a wild dolphin, elephant, fox, or raven, none of whom have any obvious evolutionary reason to trust us, sometimes decide we're exactly the right creature to approach when everything has gone wrong? The answer involves genuinely rigorous published science, a handful of theories about animal cognition still actively debated in academic circles, and several documented cases so specific and strange they sound more like campfire folklore than peer-reviewed field biology. Let's start with the most scientifically solid example in this entire story, because it's the one that's been tested, measured, and published in one of the world's most prestigious journals. The greater honey guide found across sub-Saharan Africa has a problem. It craves beeswax and bee larvae, but it physically cannot break into a defended hive on its own. Bees are dangerous, and a small bird has no real way past thousands of stinging defenders. Humans, conversely, have fire, tools, and generations of accumulated knowledge for subduing bees and safely cracking open hives. What humans are genuinely bad at is locating hidden hives in the first place, often tucked deep inside trees scattered across vast, difficult-to-search bushland. The honey guide solves both problems simultaneously through an elegant division of labor. It locates the hive using its own specialized senses, then flies toward a human honey hunter, calling loudly and persistently, physically leading that person, sometimes over considerable distance through difficult terrain, directly to the nest. The human opens the hive with fire and tools, takes the honey, and leaves behind the wax and larvae as payment for the bird's services. For years, this was treated as charming anecdote rather than rigorous science. Then, in 2016, researcher Claire Spottiswoode led a team testing it experimentally in Mozambique, with results published in the journal Science. Local honey hunters use a very specific vocal call, passed down through generations, meant to summon honey guide cooperation. When researchers played that exact call against other control sounds of equal volume and duration, honey guides responded dramatically differently. The specific cooperation call roughly doubled the probability of being guided to a nest, jumping from around 33% to 66%, and increased the overall probability of successfully finding a bee's nest from 17 to 54%. The bird wasn't reacting to noise in general. It was recognizing one specific human signal among many, and attaching real functional meaning to it. According to the researchers, this is one of the only known examples on Earth of a genuinely wild, completely undomesticated animal engaging in active, learned, mutually beneficial cooperation with humans to actual two-way communication, not tolerance born of necessity, not captive training with treats, but a free-living wild bird that has developed a functioning communication channel entirely independent of any human attempt to domesticate it. This raises an uncomfortable question. When an animal asks a human for help, what's genuinely happening cognitively? Does it understand, in some meaningful sense, that humans possess a specific capability to solve its specific problem, or something far simpler occurring beneath the surface? Something that merely resembles understanding from the outside? Researchers distinguish between a few explanations requiring very different levels of sophistication. The simplest is pure learned association. An animal has personally experienced humans being helpful at some point, and generalizes that single experience to future distress. This requires no understanding of human intentions or separate minds at all, just a straightforward reinforced link between humans in this context and relief. A more sophisticated explanation requires something closer to a basic theory of mind, some partial understanding that humans possess their own separate goals and intentions, genuinely distinct from the animal's own experience. This is a considerably higher cognitive bar, and exactly how many species clear it remains actively debated. But there's compelling evidence, particularly from dogs studied using mobile eye tracking technology, that at least some animals operate in this more sophisticated category. Dogs respond dramatically more strongly to combined human pointing and direct eye contact, what researchers call an ostensive signal, clearly meant to communicate something deliberate, than to either cue alone or to non-communicative directional movement. The dog isn't simply reacting to motion. It's interpreting the gesture as meaningfully referencing something specific and external, the same basic skill human infants develop when they first grasp that a pointing finger means look over there, not look at my finger. That same skill, running in reverse, may be exactly what happens when a distressed wild animal deliberately approaches a person during a genuine crisis. Consider the breadth of individually documented incidents. A bottlenose dolphin off Hawaii approached a group of scuba divers swimming in an unmistakably labored, impaired manner. Diving instructor Keller Laros initially followed standard wildlife guidance not to interfere, but the dolphin's persistent circling made it clear something was genuinely wrong. It had swallowed a fishhook with line wound tightly around its body. After Laros removed the hook and freed the line, the dolphin didn't immediately bolt. It surfaced, then deliberately returned to face the diver directly before finally departing, in what witnesses widely interpreted as some form of acknowledgement. A raven perched on a fence outside a rural property, squawking loudly and persistently for over an hour, refusing to leave. When someone finally investigated, they found 4 porcupine quills embedded in its face and wing. The bird allowed a complete stranger to come close enough to remove all 4, one at a time, tolerating exactly the sustained human contact every survival instinct should have told it to avoid. There's the case of an Indian elephant calf trapped in a deep man-made watering hole, unable to climb out. The mother, in escalating distress, approached a nearby road and made repeated, unmistakable overtures toward passing humans until she successfully led a group back to the hole, where they organized a rescue and pulled the calf to safety. A southern right whale off Sydney, entangled in fishing line and debris around its mouth, approached a small boat and repeatedly bobbed alongside it until a teenager aboard was able to pull the tangled material free. A whale shark off Australia swam directly to a fishing boat and held perfectly still for a full 20 minutes while a diver removed rope wound around its body. An animal roughly the size of a school bus voluntarily submitting to what amounted to veterinary care with no anesthesia, no restraint, and no guarantee of its continued cooperation. And perhaps strangest of all, a wild fox in Russia, filmed with its head completely stuck inside a glass jar, walked directly up to a group of men and simply stood there until one of them removed the jar by hand. The fox trotted off cheerfully afterward, pausing briefly to glance back before disappearing into the trees. What's especially worth noting is that wildlife rehabilitators report this exact pattern across a surprisingly wide range of species, not just the famously intelligent ones like elephants and dolphins. Researchers at long-term sanctuaries have documented coyotes, wolves, bears, and cougars, all displaying the same essential behavior under genuine extremis. An animal that normally maintains significant instinctive distance from humans will approach and effectively solicit help during acute crisis in a way clearly distinct from its normal day-to-day wariness. One particularly striking case involved 4 young wild deer, exhausted from attempting to swim across the icy waters of Stevens Passage off Alaska, at real risk of drowning. Spotting a boat in the distance, all 4 swam directly toward it and were pulled aboard, behavior running counter to virtually every instinct a wild deer holds around an unfamiliar vessel full of unfamiliar primates. When the alternative is drowning alone in freezing water, the underlying calculation shifts immediately, and whatever fear response normally keeps deer at a safe distance gets overridden by something considerably more urgent. This pattern, genuine desperation overriding normal avoidance behavior, appears again and again across the entire documented record. It strongly suggests that the baseline wariness wild animals show toward humans, The same deeply ingrained fear response covered in earlier research on why animals learn to fear us as a species isn't some fixed, unbreakable rule. It's more accurately described as a default setting, calibrated under ordinary circumstances by millennia of evolutionary pressure, plus individually learned caution. But default settings can apparently be overridden entirely when a situation becomes desperate enough that approaching a human becomes the smaller risk compared to doing nothing at all. There's also a deeper evolutionary angle worth considering. Some species may carry a longer, generationally inherited history with humans, where distant ancestors' occasional willingness to approach us under specific circumstances produce genuinely beneficial outcomes often enough across enough generations to be reinforced and maintained over evolutionary time. The honey guide is the clearest example, running on a true evolutionary timescale rather than an individual one. An entire species developed a dedicated communication signal because cooperating with humans paid off reliably enough generation after generation to become a stable feature of its behavioral repertoire. Something structurally similar may be happening in a less formalized way with elephants, which possess remarkably long memories, sophisticated social learning, and a documented capacity to pass detailed knowledge through extended family groups across generations of matriarchal leadership. An elephant population with genuinely positive experiences involving a specific conservation organization may carry forward a kind of socially transmitted association. This particular human, in this particular place, has historically meant relief rather than harm. That's meaningfully different from broad trust extended toward humans as a species. It's a narrow, conditional exception carved deliberately out of an otherwise entirely justified general wariness. It's worth being honest about the real limits of what we can claim here with scientific confidence. We cannot interview a dolphin, elephant, or raven about its precise internal state in the moment it chooses to approach a human. Researchers remain appropriately cautious about overinterpreting behavior that might, in cold scientific reality, be explained by something simpler than genuine understanding of human minds. But the honey guide case is different from the rest of these stories because it isn't merely an anecdote. It's a rigorously controlled, formally published experiment demonstrating beyond reasonable doubt that a genuinely wild, undomesticated animal can learn to recognize one specific human signal among many and respond to it with real, measurable understanding of what that signal means for mutual benefit. And once you know with certainty that at least one wild species is unambiguously capable of that level of interspecies communication, the broader pattern of wild animals occasionally seeking out humans during genuine crisis becomes considerably less far-fetched. Maybe it's a narrow, evolutionary mutualism, refined over generations, exactly like the honey guide. Maybe it's an individual animal's hard-won personal association between one specific place and one specific group of people. Maybe in the most desperate cases, it's simply an overridden survival instinct, a calculated risk taken because every other option has run out. Whatever the precise mechanism in each individual case, the broader pattern remains remarkably consistent across species sharing almost nothing else in common. Birds, mammals, marine animals, separated by tens of millions of years of evolutionary divergence, occasionally and independently arriving at the same desperate decision when circumstances turn dire enough. When everything else fails and every instinct screams to run or hide, some wild animals make a choice that quietly defies the very fear response we spent our shared evolutionary history teaching them to feel. They walk deliberately toward the single most dangerous predator on the planet, because sometimes, against every evolutionary lesson telling them otherwise, that exact predator turns out to be precisely what they need. If this changed how you think about the animals around you, let me know in the comments. Subscribe for more research-backed deep dives into the hidden science of the animal kingdom, and next week we're exploring the flip side of this story, the animals that have learned to fear us most.